My name is Richard Morgan, 67 years old, a retired construction foreman with calloused hands and a lifetime of building homes for others. I never thought I would be physically pushed away from my family's Christmas dinner table by my own son. After my wife Elaine passed 3 years ago, I thought holidays would be our time to come together. But this Christmas, as I pulled out the chair where I had sat for decades, my son Thomas grabbed my shoulder and said those words I will never forget. That seat is for my father-in-law. Get out. If you are watching this video, I would like to know if you have ever been disrespected by your own child at a family gathering. What did you do? Before I continue my story, take a moment to like and subscribe to follow my journey of finding dignity and rebuilding family bonds after a shocking Christmas confrontation that changed everything. Elaine and I were married for 42 wonderful years. We met when I was 23 and working on my first major construction project, a library downtown. She came in looking for a summer job, all bright eyes and intelligence wrapped in a blue cotton dress. I was covered in sawdust and too tongue-tied to do more than point her toward the office. But I made sure to clean up extra nice the next day and the next, until I finally worked up the courage to ask her for coffee. Our wedding was simple but perfect. Elaine wore her mother's dress, slightly altered to fit her taller frame. I borrowed a suit from my brother and nearly fainted from the heat in the small church packed with friends and family. When she said, "I do," I felt like the luckiest man alive. How a college-educated librarian ended up with a high school graduate who worked with his hands was beyond me, but I thanked God for it every day. We bought a modest two-bedroom house in a working-class neighborhood with a yard just big enough for the swing set I built by hand. I worked long hours, often 6 days a week, coming home exhausted but satisfied. Elaine took part-time work at the local library once the children were in school, shelving books and helping with story time for the little ones. Thomas came along first in 1983. He was a serious baby who grew into a serious child, always watching, analyzing, planning. Even as a toddler, he arranged his blocks by size and color. In elementary school, his teachers praised his methodical mind and attention to detail. We knew early on he was destined for more schooling than I had managed. Our daughter Sarah arrived 3 years later, a whirlwind of energy and emotion, who balanced her brother's seriousness with spontaneous laughter. Where Thomas was careful and measured, Sarah was impulsive and creative. They fought like cats and dogs growing up, but defended each other fiercely against any outside threat. They complement each other, Elaine would say. Thomas needs Sarah's joy, and Sarah needs Thomas's stability. As the children grew, our financial situation improved. I moved up from carpenter to foreman, which meant more pay but also more responsibility. Weekends and evenings were often interrupted by calls about problems at various sites. Elaine picked up the slack at home, making sure homework was done, meals were cooked, and the household ran smoothly. When Thomas expressed interest in becoming an architect during his sophomore year of high school, Elaine and I exchanged worried glances over the dinner table. College wasn't cheap, and architecture school was among the more expensive options. But we believed in our son's potential. "We will find a way," I promised him. "You just focus on your grades." And find a way we did. I took on side jobs remodeling kitchens and bathrooms on my rare days off. Elaine worked additional hours at the library. We refinanced the house, delayed replacing our aging car, and cut corners wherever possible. Thomas graduated high school with a full scholarship to State University, but even that didn't cover all expenses. Architecture was a 5-year program, with costly supplies and study abroad requirements. We emptied our modest savings and took out loans, but we managed it. The day Thomas received his degree, I sat in the audience with tears streaming down my face, my work-roughened hands clutching the program so tightly it crumpled. "You did it, son," I said afterward, pulling him into a bear hug despite his new professional suit. "We did it, Dad," he corrected, hugging me back just as fiercely. Sarah took a different path. College wasn't for her, she insisted. Instead, she went to cosmetology school and later opened her own small salon. I helped her renovate the space, working evenings and weekends to transform a rundown storefront into a welcoming business. Her creativity flourished there, and while she never made the kind of money Thomas eventually would, she built a loyal clientele who appreciated her artistic eye and genuine warmth. Through it all, Elaine was our anchor. She managed our finances, encouraged the children's dreams, while keeping them grounded, and somehow still found time to leave me love notes in my lunchbox, even after 30 years of marriage. Our home wasn't fancy, but it was filled with laughter and books and the smell of Elaine's famous apple pie. Then came the diagnosis that changed everything. Pancreatic cancer already at stage 4. 6 months, maybe a year, with aggressive treatment. The doctor said, not quite meeting our eyes. Elaine refused to be defined by her prognosis. Quality over quantity. She insisted opting for treatments that would allow her to remain present with her family, rather than those that might extend her life marginally, but leave her too sick to enjoy it. Those final months were precious and painful in equal measure. The children visited often. Thomas flew in from Chicago, where he had secured a position with a prestigious architecture firm. Sarah closed her salon 2 days a week to help with Elaine's care. We watched old movies, looked through photo albums, and had conversations that were both heartbreaking and healing. "Promise me something," Elaine said one evening, as we sat on the porch swing, her body frail but her eyes still bright. "Promise you will not let grief consume you. Find joy again, Richard, and stay connected to the children. They will need you, and you will need them." I promised, though I couldn't imagine joy without her beside me. When she slipped away on a quiet Tuesday morning in April, I felt as though half of myself had vanished with her. The world seemed duller, food, tasteless music, empty of meaning. The first year after Elaine's death passed in a fog of grief. I went through the motions of living, showing up to work until my retirement, 6 months after we buried her, paying bills, eating enough to sustain myself, but I felt hollow. The house echoed with silence that no amount of television noise could fill. Sarah called almost daily, her voice a lifeline, pulling me back from the abyss of depression. Thomas called weekly, his conversations more practical, focused on my finances, my health, my home maintenance. Different approaches, but both children trying their best to honor their mother's wishes by keeping me tethered to life. Slowly, painfully, I began to emerge from the worst of the grief. I joined a widower's support group at the community center, where men who understood my particular brand of loss shared coping strategies and occasionally dark humor that made the burden a bit lighter. I volunteered at the local elementary school, helping build and maintain a community garden where children could learn about growing food. The simple pleasure of working with my hands, while surrounded by young, hopeful energy, began to reawaken something in me. As the second anniversary of Elaine's death approached, Sarah suggested I might want to try dating again. "Mom wouldn't want you to be alone forever, Dad," she said gently, as we shared coffee at her kitchen table. "I'm not ready," I told her honestly. "Maybe someday, but not yet." What I didn't tell her was that I had started to notice a woman at my support group. Catherine, a retired nurse whose husband had died of heart failure 3 years earlier. She had a quick wit and kind eyes, and sometimes our conversations continued long after the official meeting ended. We weren't dating, just talking, but those talks were the first time since losing Elaine that I had felt truly seen. Thomas, meanwhile, had news of his own. He had met someone special, a fellow architect named Meredith from a wealthy East Coast family. When they became engaged after a whirlwind 8-month courtship, I was happy for him, but concerned by the speed. Elaine would have expressed those concerns gently. Without her diplomatic touch, I clumsily asked if they weren't rushing things. "You don't understand how things work in professional circles, Dad," Thomas said dismissively. "Meredith and I are building a partnership, personal and professional. Her family connections are opening doors that would have taken me years to access otherwise." The comment stung, implying as it did that my working-class perspective couldn't comprehend the complexities of his world. But I swallowed my hurt and tried to be supportive. When I met Meredith at their engagement dinner, she was polite but distant, her handshake firm and brief, her attention quickly turning to other guests. "She's just nervous," Thomas assured me. "She wants to make a good impression." Meredith's parents, Harold and Virginia Whitmore, were clearly uncomfortable in the modest Italian restaurant Thomas had chosen as neutral territory for our first meeting. Harold barely acknowledged my extended hand, while Virginia openly wiped her chair with a napkin before sitting down. Their conversation centered around people and places I didn't know, interspersed with barely veiled comments about the neighborhood. "Is it safe to park luxury vehicles on this street?" Harold asked, peering through the window at his Mercedes. "Perfectly safe, sir," I assured him, trying to mask my irritation. "I've lived in this city my whole life." "Yes, Thomas mentioned you were in construction, was it?" Virginia's tone made it sound like I'd spent my career cleaning sewers rather than building homes. Thomas jumped in quickly. "Dad was a construction foreman for over 30 years. He managed multi-million-dollar projects." I appreciated my son's defense, but I didn't miss how he emphasized the financial scale of my work rather than the craft and care I'd put into it, as if the only measure of value was monetary. The wedding planning quickly became a source of tension. The Whitmores insisted on a lavish affair at their country club, with costs that made my head spin. When Thomas called to discuss my contribution, I had to be honest about my financial limitations. "Dad, this is my wedding," he said, disappointment evident in his voice. "Mom would have wanted it to be special." "Your mother would have wanted it to be meaningful," I countered, "not financially crippling." In the end, I contributed what I could, draining a significant portion of my retirement savings in the process. The wedding itself was beautiful, but felt foreign to me, filled with people in expensive clothes, making small talk about summer homes and investment portfolios. Sarah stuck by my side, both of us fish out of water in this rarefied atmosphere. "Thomas barely looks like himself," she whispered, as we watched him circulate among the guests, his laugh a bit too loud, his gestures a bit too expansive. "He's just growing up, finding his own way," I said, trying to convince myself as much as her. After the wedding, Thomas and Meredith settled in Chicago, where they both worked for the same prestigious firm. Our phone calls became less frequent, usually initiated by me rather than him. When they announced Meredith's pregnancy a year later, I was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandfather. I spent weeks crafting a perfect wooden cradle, sanding it until it was smooth as silk, carving delicate patterns along the sides. When I presented it during a visit to their sleek, modern apartment, Meredith's smile didn't reach her eyes. "How rustic," she said, running a finger along the polished wood. "We've actually already purchased a Bellini crib for the nursery. It matches the other furnishings." "The cradle could go in your bedroom," I suggested, trying to salvage the moment. "That's where we kept Thomas for the first few months. Elaine liked having him close." "Current pediatric recommendations advise against co-sleeping," Meredith replied coolly. "But we appreciate the thought. Perhaps we can use it for storage." Thomas watched this exchange without comment, his silence more painful than if he'd openly sided with his wife. Later, when Meredith was resting, I asked him directly about the cradle. "It's beautiful craftsmanship, Dad," he acknowledged, "but it doesn't really fit with our aesthetic." And Meredith's parents have already been incredibly generous with baby gifts. I returned home with the cradle, which now sits in my garage, a silent reminder of the growing distance between my son and me. When my grandson Jackson was born, I flew to Chicago for a brief visit. The baby was beautiful, perfect in every way, but I felt like an intruder in their carefully curated life. Meredith's mother had taken up residence in their guest room to help with the transition, leaving me to stay at a nearby hotel. My time with Jackson was limited and supervised, as if I might somehow damage this precious new life with my working-class hands. When I asked to hold him, Meredith first insisted I use hand sanitizer, then hovered nervously as if I'd never held an infant before. I wanted to remind her that I had raised 2 healthy children of my own, but I bit my tongue for Thomas's sake. Sarah's life took a different turn. After a series of disappointing relationships, she met and married David, a kind-hearted middle school teacher with 2 young children from his previous marriage. I loved watching her blossom into the role of stepmother, bringing creativity and fun into these children's lives, while respecting the boundaries of their complex family situation. When Sarah and David decided to relocate to a smaller community 2 hours away for better schools and affordable housing, I felt the loss keenly but understood their reasoning. Unlike Thomas, Sarah called often and visited when possible, bringing her stepchildren, who delighted in helping me with projects around the house and garden. "You're so good with them," Sarah observed during one visit. "They don't have any grandparents nearby. Their mom's parents are in Arizona, and David's dad passed away years ago. His mom has dementia now." "I'm happy to be a substitute grandpa," I told her truthfully. "They're wonderful kids." As the 3rd Christmas after Elaine's death approached, Thomas surprised me with a phone call. "We'd like you to come to Chicago for the holidays," he said. "Jackson is old enough to travel now, but Meredith doesn't want to disrupt his routine too much. We thought it would be easier if you came to us." The invitation, while not particularly warm, felt like a step toward rebuilding our relationship. "I'd love to," I said immediately. "Should I book a hotel?" "Actually," Thomas hesitated, "Meredith's parents will be staying with us, but we thought you could take our basement guest room. It's not fancy, but it has a private bathroom." I ignored the implication that I wasn't worthy of the same accommodations as the Whitmores. "That sounds perfect," I assured him. "I'm just happy to be included." As I packed for the trip, I included small, thoughtful gifts for everyone. For Jackson, I had crafted a set of wooden blocks, each face hand-painted with letters, numbers, and simple pictures. For Thomas and Meredith, a handmade cutting board of maple and walnut. For the Whitmores, a selection of local specialty foods from our region. And tucked into my suitcase was a special family album I had assembled filled with photos of Thomas growing up, including several precious images of him with Elaine. The flight to Chicago was turbulent but uneventful. Thomas met me at the airport, his greeting polite but distant, as he helped load my luggage into his luxury SUV. On the drive to their home in an exclusive North Shore community, he filled me in on the holiday plans. "Christmas Eve will be just family," he explained. "Christmas Day, we're having some of Meredith's colleagues over for dinner. Try to keep conversation light, Dad. These are important connections for our careers." I swallowed my irritation at being coached like a child. "I'll be on my best behavior," I promised mildly. Their home was impressive, a modern interpretation of a traditional design with soaring ceilings and walls of windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Inside, minimalist decor in shades of white and gray created an atmosphere that felt more like a design showroom than a family home. Meredith greeted me with a perfunctory hug, then immediately handed me a printed sheet of paper. "House rules," she explained. Just so everyone's on the same page, Jackson is on a precise schedule and we try to maintain consistency. I glanced down at the detailed list of do's and don'ts, feeling increasingly like an unwelcome intruder rather than family. No shoes in the house, no touching the thermostat, no using the main kitchen without supervision. Specific quiet hours during Jackson's naps. The basement kitchenette was available for my use, stocked with approved snacks. The Whitmores arrived an hour after me, greeted with genuine warmth by Meredith and deferential respect by Thomas. Harold clapped my son on the shoulder. "There's my boy," he said jovially, as if Thomas were his son rather than mine. When I finally got to see Jackson, my heart melted. At 18 months, he was a perfect blend of Thomas and Meredith, with Thomas's serious expression, but Meredith's delicate features. I approached slowly, kneeling down to his level. "Hello, Jackson. I'm your Grandpa Richard." The little boy regarded me solemnly, then broke into a beautiful smile that transported me back 30 years to Thomas's own childhood. I reached out, wanting to hug him, but Meredith quickly intervened. "He's a bit shy with strangers," she said, scooping him up protectively. "He needs time to warm up." "I'm not a stranger," I said quietly. "I'm his grandfather." "Yes, but he hasn't seen you since he was a newborn," she replied. In his perception, that's essentially a stranger. The days leading up to Christmas were a strange dance of formality and forced cheer. I tried to connect with Jackson whenever possible, sitting on the floor to play with him, while Meredith hovered nearby. The Whitmores dominated most conversations with Thomas, deferring to their opinions on everything from politics to parenting. I felt increasingly invisible, speaking only when directly addressed, which was rare. One afternoon, finding myself alone with my grandson, while Meredith took a phone call in the next room, I seized the opportunity to show him the wooden blocks I had made. His delight was immediate and genuine, his little hands exploring the smooth surfaces and bright colors with fascination. When Meredith returned and saw us, her expression darkened. "What are those? They aren't on the approved toy list." "I made them for Jackson," I explained. "Each piece is hand-sanded and finished with non-toxic paint. They're completely safe." She plucked a block from Jackson's hand, examining it critically. "The edges are too sharp, and these could be a choking hazard. Besides, we're trying to limit wooden toys due to potential splinters." "Meredith, I've been working with wood for 50 years. There are no splinters, and the edges are deliberately rounded for safety." I tried to keep my tone reasonable, but frustration was building. "Nevertheless, I'd prefer to stick with the toys we've already vetted." She gathered the blocks and handed them back to me. "Perhaps when he's older." That evening, I overheard Thomas and Meredith arguing in their bedroom. "Your father is undermining our parenting decisions," Meredith insisted. "Those blocks weren't approved." "They're just blocks, Meredith, handmade with love by his grandfather." "That's not the point. We have standards for a reason. Your father doesn't respect our boundaries." "He's trying his best," Thomas defended weakly. "This is all new to him." "Well, it's not new to my parents, and they managed to respect our rules perfectly well." The conversation shifted to Christmas dinner arrangements, with Meredith dictating the seating chart. My father at the head of the table, of course. My mother to his right, me to his left. You beside me, then the Richardsons next to you. We'll put your father at the far end with the Johnsons. They're patient with his type. "His type?" Thomas questioned. "You know what I mean. Blue collar, limited education. They won't mind the construction stories." I moved away from the door, heart heavy with the realization that my son hadn't defended me against this characterization. In Meredith's world, and apparently now in Thomas's as well, I was an embarrassment to be managed, not a father to be honored. Christmas Eve arrived with picture-perfect snow falling gently outside the wall of windows. Jackson was allowed to stay up slightly later than usual, dressed in expensive holiday pajamas that Meredith mentioned 3 times had been custom-made. We gathered in the living room where a professionally decorated tree stood, adorned with coordinated ornaments in silver and blue, not a handmade decoration in sight. I thought of our family Christmases when Thomas and Sarah were young, our tree a chaotic collection of school projects, inherited ornaments and sentimental keepsakes. Elaine had insisted that a tree should tell a family's story, not match the decor. Seeing Thomas in this sterile holiday setting made me wonder if he remembered those warmer, messier celebrations at all. The gift exchange was awkward. The Whitmores presented Jackson with an elaborate ride-on car that probably cost more than a month of my pension. Thomas and Meredith gave me a store-bought sweater still in its department store box. When I gave them my handcrafted cutting board, Meredith thanked me politely, but immediately set it aside. The family album received slightly more interest from Thomas, who flipped through it quickly before Harold diverted his attention to discuss some investment opportunity. By Christmas morning, I was counting the days until my departure. We spent the day preparing for the dinner party, or rather, I spent it trying to stay out of the way, as caterers and staff transformed the already immaculate home into a holiday showcase. Jackson was kept to his routine, which meant I saw him only briefly between his nap and the guests' arrival. When the doorbell announced the first guests, Thomas pulled me aside. "Remember, Dad, these are important colleagues. Please keep the conversation appropriate." "What exactly are you worried I might say, Thomas?" I asked, the accumulated hurts of the visit finally spilling over. "That I worked with my hands for a living, that I never went to college, that I'm not good enough for your new life." Thomas had the grace to look embarrassed. "That's not what I meant. It's just different worlds, Dad. I'm trying to navigate both." "No, son. You've chosen one world and left the other behind. Just be honest about it." Before he could respond, Meredith called him away to greet their guests. I retreated to my basement room to compose myself, hurt giving way to anger, then to a deep sadness that threatened to overwhelm me. Elaine would know what to do, how to bridge this growing chasm between Thomas and me. Without her, I was floundering. Finally, I splashed cold water on my face, straightened my tie, and headed upstairs, determined to get through the evening with as much dignity as possible. The living and dining rooms were filled with well-dressed people holding champagne flutes, making the kind of sophisticated small talk that had never been my strong suit. I recognized Harold holding court near the fireplace, Virginia circulating among the guests, like a queen among subjects. Dinner was announced, and people began moving toward the dining room. I followed, searching for Thomas to ask where I should sit when I spotted the elaborate place cards at each setting. Making my way around the long table, I finally found my name at the very far end, as Meredith had planned, separated from Jackson by the entire length of the table. The injustice of it hit me hard. I was family, the only blood relative Thomas had at this gathering, yet I had been relegated to the equivalent of the children's table. Impulsively, I moved my place card to the empty seat beside Jackson's high chair. If I was only going to see my grandson for a few days, I wanted to at least sit near him during Christmas dinner. I was just settling into the chair when I felt a hand on my shoulder. Thomas stood there, his expression a mix of embarrassment and annoyance. "Dad, that's not your seat," he said in a low voice. "You're down at the other end, remember?" "I'd like to sit near Jackson," I explained. "I've barely had any time with him this visit." Thomas glanced nervously at Meredith, who was watching our exchange with narrowed eyes. "This seat is reserved for Harold," he said, his voice taking on an edge I'd never heard before. "It's already decided." "Can't Harold sit somewhere else just this once?" I asked. "I'm only here for a few days, and I'm Jackson's grandfather." "That seat is for my father-in-law," Thomas hissed, his grip on my shoulder tightening. Get out. Before I could respond, he physically pushed me back from the chair, not violently, but with unmistakable force enough that I had to catch myself against the next chair to avoid stumbling. The conversation around us faltered as guests became aware of the tension. In that moment, looking at my son's face, I didn't recognize him. The gentle boy who had once proudly shown me his first architectural drawing, the young man who had hugged me fiercely at his graduation and said, "We did it, Dad," had been replaced by someone who would physically remove his own father from a chair to please his in-laws. I had a choice to make. I could create a scene, confront Thomas in front of his colleagues and friends, perhaps even walk out dramatically. Or I could find another way, one that preserved both our dignities while still standing firm in my own worth. I chose the latter. "I understand," I said calmly, meeting his gaze steadily. "I'll find my assigned seat." As conversations around us resumed and Thomas moved away, I didn't head to the far end of the table. Instead, I walked deliberately to the kitchen, found a spare chair, and brought it back to the dining room. Without a word, I placed it directly next to Jackson's high chair, on the opposite side from the seat reserved for Harold. It wasn't part of the original table setting, slightly higher than the other chairs, clearly not matching the carefully orchestrated aesthetic. But it was a seat, and it was next to my grandson. I sat down, smiled at Jackson, who babbled happily at the sight of me, and acted as if nothing unusual had occurred. The other guests exchanged glances, but adapted quickly, shifting to accommodate the unexpected addition. Thomas and Meredith stood frozen for a moment, caught between making another scene by removing me again or accepting the compromise I had created. Harold entered the room, noted the changed arrangement with raised eyebrows, but took his assigned seat without comment. Meredith's tight smile never reached her eyes, but she signaled the caterers to begin serving. Throughout dinner, I focused on Jackson, helping him with his food, wiping his face gently, when needed speaking softly to him about the Christmas lights and colors around us. I participated in the general conversation, when addressed, kept my answers polite and brief, and ignored the occasional condescending tones from Harold or the pointed sighs from Meredith. By dessert, something unexpected had happened. Jackson was clearly delighted with my attention, reaching for me repeatedly, offering me bites of his food, and laughing at the simple games I played with his napkin. Several guests had engaged me in genuine conversation, finding my perspectives on architecture, from a builder's viewpoint, refreshingly different. One woman, a senior partner at Thomas's firm, seemed particularly interested in my practical experience with various building materials. "My father was a carpenter," she confided. "He always said architects would design better buildings if they had to build them first." "Your father was a wise man," I replied, grateful for the connection. As coffee was served, I noticed Thomas watching our interactions with a complex expression. There was still annoyance there, but also something else. Perhaps recognition. Maybe even a flicker of shame. When Jackson began showing signs of overtiredness, I stood up. "I should let you get this little one to bed," I said to Meredith. "Thank you for a lovely dinner." Instead of heading to my basement room, though, I went to the coat closet and retrieved my jacket. Thomas intercepted me at the front door. "Where are you going?" he asked. "For a walk," I said simply. "I need some air. It's freezing outside and it's dark." "I'll be fine," I assured him. "I grew up in colder weather than this." Outside, the night was crisp and clear, stars visible despite the city lights. I walked without direction, processing the events of the evening, the visit, the years of growing distance. The snow crunched satisfyingly beneath my feet, the physical exertion helping to clear my mind. By the time I circled back to the house, most of the guests' cars were gone. In the entryway, I found Sarah sitting on the stairs, still wearing her coat. "Sarah," I was genuinely shocked. "What are you doing here?" She stood up and hugged me fiercely. "Surprise, I was going to come tomorrow, but David's mother had a rough day, so we moved our plans up. I've been texting Thomas all day, but apparently his phone was off during the dinner party." Her expression grew serious. "I just got here about 20 minutes ago, and the atmosphere is tense." "What happened, Dad?" I gave her the abbreviated version as we moved to the living room. Thomas appeared in the doorway, his posture defensive. "You called Sarah," he accused. "I had no idea she was coming," I assured him. "This is as much a surprise to me as it is to you." Sarah looked between us. "Okay, clearly I've walked into something. Thomas, want to tell me your side?" "There's nothing to tell," he said stiffly. "Dad decided to rearrange our seating chart in the middle of a dinner party with my colleagues and partners present. After you physically pushed me away from the table," I added quietly. Sarah's eyes widened. "You did what?" "I didn't push him," Thomas defended. "I guided him away from a seat that wasn't his." "You put your hands on me and shoved," I corrected. "In front of everyone, including Jackson." Sarah stood up, her expression thunderous. "Thomas Morgan, I cannot believe what I'm hearing. You pushed our father on Christmas over a chair." "You don't understand the context," Thomas began. "Then explain it," Sarah challenged. "Explain why our father, who worked 60-hour weeks for decades to put you through architecture school, who built our home with his own hands, who has never asked for anything in return, couldn't sit where he wanted at Christmas dinner in his own son's house." Thomas's face flushed. "It's complicated, Sarah. There are expectations protocols. The only expectation that matters is that you treat your father with respect," Sarah interrupted. "Mom would be ashamed of you right now, and you know it." The mention of Elaine seemed to penetrate Thomas's defenses in a way nothing else had. He sank onto the couch, suddenly looking very young and lost. "I've made a mess of things, haven't I?" he said softly. "Yes," Sarah said bluntly, "but it's not too late to fix it." I moved to sit beside my son. "Thomas, I don't need to be the center of attention. I don't need the best chair or the fanciest room. But I do need to be treated like your father, not an inconvenient obligation." "I know," he admitted, not meeting my eyes. "It's just, Meredith's family has opened so many doors for me professionally. Her father's connections, his influence in the industry. I feel like I have to choose sometimes between my roots and my future." "That's a false choice," I told him gently. "Who you were shapes who you are becoming. You don't have to reject one to embrace the other." Our conversation was interrupted by Meredith's appearance, her expression guarded as she took in the scene. "Sarah, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow. The guest room isn't prepared." "Don't worry about me," Sarah replied with forced brightness. "I can bunk with Dad. We were just having a family discussion." "I see," Meredith said coolly. "Well, it's getting late and we have an early start tomorrow. Harold is taking us to his club for brunch." "Actually," Thomas said, surprising us all, "I think we should cancel the club. Spend the day here, just family." Meredith's eyebrows rose. "My father has already arranged everything. It would be rude to cancel." "Your parents can still go," Thomas suggested. "But I need to spend time with my family, too. My whole family," he added, glancing meaningfully at me. I could see the calculation in Meredith's eyes, weighing her options, assessing how much to push. Finally, she nodded tightly. "Fine. I'll let them know you have other commitments. I'll still take Jackson, though. He's been looking forward to the Children's Activity Center at the club." "I think Jackson might enjoy spending time with both his grandfathers," Thomas said, his voice gaining confidence. "And his Aunt Sarah, whom he barely knows." A flash of genuine emotion crossed Meredith's face, quickly masked. We'll discuss this in private, she said before turning on her heel and leaving the room. Sarah let out a low whistle. Well, that was interesting. Good for you, Thomas. Better late than never. The next morning brought fresh tension as Meredith and her parents prepared to leave for their club brunch without Thomas. Harold made his disappointment clear, reminding Thomas of an important client who would be there while Virginia fussed over Jackson's outfit and pointedly ignored Sarah and me. Are you sure about this? Meredith asked Thomas one final time, her voice low, but carrying in the quiet hallway. Daddy could introduce you to the Sanderson Group. They're planning that new downtown development. Thomas hesitated, and for a moment I thought he would cave. Then his gaze found mine, and something shifted in his expression. I'm sure, he said firmly. Give my regrets to the Sandersons. Family comes first today. After they left, an awkward silence fell. It had been so long since Thomas, Sarah, and I had been alone together that we seemed to have forgotten how to interact without the buffer of others. So, Sarah said brightly, what shall we do with our unexpected family day? Thomas looked around the immaculate, impersonal living room as if seeing it for the first time. Actually, I'm not sure there's much to do here. This place isn't really set up for hanging out. We could go out, I suggested. Is there a park nearby Jackson might enjoy the snow? Thomas's face lit up. There's a perfect sledding hill about 10 minutes from here. I've been meaning to take Jackson, but Meredith worries about safety. We'll be careful, Sarah promised. Between the three of us, he'll be the most protected kid on the hill. The morning at the park was like stepping back in time. Away from the constraints of the house and Meredith's rules, Thomas relaxed visibly, pulling Jackson on a small sled, helping him make snow angels, laughing when Sarah initiated a gentle snowball fight. I watched my adult children play with my grandson, their cheeks red with cold and exertion, their guards finally down. He reminds me of you at that age, I told Thomas as we sat on a bench, catching our breath, while Sarah took Jackson to examine an icicle. Always serious, until something broke through and revealed the joy underneath. I remember how you used to pull me on that old wooden sled, Thomas said, surprising me with the specific memory, the red one with the metal runners that you restored. You remember that? You couldn't have been more than Jackson's age. Thomas nodded. I remember more than you think, Dad. Building the treehouse, learning to use tools in your workshop, the bedtime stories you made up about the family of squirrels that lived in our backyard. Something tight in my chest began to loosen. I wasn't sure if those memories stayed with you with all the changes in your life. They're still there, he admitted, sometimes buried but never gone. He watched Jackson toddle through the snow, bundled in his snowsuit like a miniature astronaut. I want him to have memories like that too. Real experiences, not just expensive toys and exclusive clubs. That's your decision to make, I said carefully. Yours and Meredith's. Thomas sighed. Meredith grew up differently. Status and appearances were everything in her family. It's hard for her to understand why I'd value a handmade wooden cradle over a designer crib, or stories about squirrels over educational apps. Different isn't wrong, I reminded him. Just different. But you don't have to choose between worlds, Thomas. You can take the best from both. After the park, we found a casual diner for lunch, the kind of place I doubted Thomas had visited since leaving home. Jackson delighted in the pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse, while the rest of us enjoyed hearty comfort food that bore no resemblance to the gourmet offerings of the previous night's dinner party. Remember when we used to go to Denny's after church? Sarah asked, dunking a French fry in ketchup. Mom always got the Grand Slam breakfast even though it was lunchtime. And you always wanted chocolate chip pancakes, Thomas added, smiling at the memory. Dad would finish whatever we couldn't eat, Sarah continued. Mom used to say he was the family garbage disposal. Waste not, want not. I quoted one of Elaine's favorite sayings. By the time we returned to the house, the atmosphere between us had transformed. The stiff formality was gone, replaced by the comfortable familiarity of shared history and renewed connection. Even Jackson seemed to sense the change, freely going to all three of us for attention and affection. When Meredith and her parents returned from their club outing, they found us in the living room, the perfect decor, disrupted by the fort we had built from sofa cushions and throw blankets. Jackson was in the middle of the construction, giggling, as Thomas pretended to be a monster, trying to break in. "What on earth is going on here?" Virginia's shocked voice cut through the laughter. "Look at this mess." Meredith's expression was thunderous as she surveyed the disarray. "Thomas, I cannot believe you allowed this. What will the cleaning service think?" Thomas emerged from behind the fort, his hair mussed, his expensive sweater wrinkled. For a moment I feared he would revert to his deferential posture. Instead, he stood up straight and smiled at his wife. "We're playing Meredith. It's what families do on holidays." He gestured to Jackson, who was peeking out from behind a cushion. "Look how happy he is." Harold made a dismissive sound. "The boy needs structure, not chaos. This kind of undisciplined environment leads to poor development." "Actually," Sarah interjected sweetly, "child development experts emphasize the importance of unstructured play for cognitive and emotional growth. Creativity, problem-solving, social skills all enhanced through play." Virginia sniffed. "And you know this because I'm married to a middle school teacher who has a master's degree in child development," Sarah replied. "But also because it's common sense. Children need play. They need joy. They need to feel connected to their family through shared experiences." An uncomfortable silence fell, broken only by Jackson's happy babbling as he continued to explore the fort, oblivious to the tension around him. Finally, Thomas spoke. "Meredith, could we talk privately for a minute?" They disappeared upstairs, while Harold, Virginia, Sarah, and I engaged in the most awkward small talk imaginable. When Thomas and Meredith returned, both looked serious but calm. "We've decided to change our plans for the remainder of the visit," Thomas announced. "Instead of the formal dinner at the Richardsons' tomorrow night, we're going to have a simple family meal here. Just us." Meredith nodded stiffly. "And we thought perhaps Harold and Virginia might enjoy some time to themselves. The spa at the Four Seasons has an excellent couples package." The implication was clear. The Whitmores were being gently uninvited from the family gathering. Harold's face reddened with indignation, but Virginia placed a restraining hand on his arm. "That sounds lovely, dear," she said with brittle politeness. "We could use some relaxation after the holiday rush." The next day brought another shift in the household dynamic. With the Whitmores occupied elsewhere, Meredith seemed less rigid, though still reserved. She watched with cautious curiosity as Sarah taught Jackson a simple hand-clapping game, and actually smiled when I presented him with a small wooden toy car I had carved the night before. "You're very skilled," she acknowledged. "Did you learn woodworking from your father?" "Self-taught mostly," I explained. "Started with necessity, making simple repairs, and grew into a hobby over the years. It's meditative working with your hands." "I've never created anything physical," she admitted. "My work is all digital designs, concepts that others bring to life." "It's never too late to learn," I offered. "Thomas used to enjoy helping me in the workshop when he was young." "I'd forgotten that," Thomas said, joining the conversation. "Remember the birdhouse we made for Mom's birthday, with the little perch shaped like a crescent moon? She hung it outside the kitchen window so she could watch the birds while doing dishes." I recalled the memory, bittersweet. Meredith looked between us, something shifting in her expression. I didn't know you built things too, Thomas. You've never mentioned it. It was a long time ago, he said, before drafting software and 3D modeling became my tools. Jackson might enjoy making something with you someday, she suggested tentatively. When he's older, of course. It was a small opening, but I recognized it for the olive branch it was. I'd be happy to teach both of you, I offered. Simple projects at first, maybe a birdhouse. The evening meal was nothing like the elaborate production of Christmas dinner, but somehow more satisfying. We ordered pizza 8 on the couch while watching a holiday movie and talked about everything and nothing. Jackson fell asleep in my arms, his small body warm and trusting, his breath gentle against my neck. He likes you, Meredith observed quietly. Children recognize love, I told her. It's a language they understand instinctively. As the visit drew to a close, Thomas helped me pack my bags, lingering in the basement guest room longer than necessary. Dad, about what happened at dinner the other night, he began awkwardly. I'm ashamed of how I behaved, putting my hands on you like that. It's unforgivable. Not unforgivable, I corrected. Just a mistake. One I hope you've learned from. I have, he assured me. I've been so focused on building this new life, impressing the right people, that I lost sight of the foundation everything else rests on. He looked around the sterile guest room. This house, Meredith's family connections, my position at the firm. None of it would exist if you and Mom hadn't sacrificed to get me through school. I forgot that. You didn't forget, I said gently. You just got caught up in a different world with different values. Finding balance takes time. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. Meredith and I talked a lot after you and Sarah went to bed last night. About priorities, about family, about what kind of parents we want to be for Jackson. He smiled wryly. Let's just say it was an overdue conversation. At the airport, our goodbyes were different from our greeting. Thomas hugged me tightly, like he used to before adult responsibilities and class consciousness created barriers between us. Jackson clung to my leg, not wanting me to leave, which secretly delighted me despite the tears it produced. Even Meredith's farewell was warmer, her handshake replaced with a brief but genuine hug. We'll visit you next time, she promised. I'd like to see where Thomas grew up. I'd like that, I told her sincerely. Sarah, who had extended her stay to travel home with me, linked her arm through mine as we headed to the security line. Well, that was quite the Christmas drama, she observed. But I think something important happened back there. Thomas remembered who he is, I said, and who we are to each other. All because you refused to be pushed aside, Sarah said, literally and figuratively. The flight home was smooth, Sarah dozing against my shoulder like she used to on long car rides when she was small. I gazed out the window at the patchwork of city lights below, thinking about family identity and the quiet power of standing your ground without burning bridges. Life has a way of coming full circle when we least expect it. 6 months after that tumultuous Christmas, Thomas called with surprising news. He had accepted a position with a smaller, more innovative firm in our hometown, taking a significant pay cut, but gaining creative freedom and work-life balance in return. Meredith's on board, I asked, surprised given her career ambitions. It was partly her idea, he admitted. She's been rethinking her priorities since Christmas, especially after her mother's health scare in February. Life's too short to chase status at the expense of happiness. They bought a house just 20 minutes from mine, a comfortable mid-century modern, with a yard for Jackson, and most importantly, a detached garage that Thomas immediately began converting into a woodworking studio. I thought Jackson might want to learn from his grandpa, he explained when he showed me the space. And maybe his dad could use a refresher course too. Meredith has thawed considerably, though she still maintains high standards for their home and Jackson's upbringing. The difference is that now there's room for compromise for simple pleasures, alongside educational enrichment, for noisy family dinners, as well as cultural outings. Most weekends find us working together in that garage workshop, 3 generations of Morgan men creating with our hands. Jackson, now 2.5, mostly plays with scraps and plastic tools, but his fascination with the process is genuine. Thomas has rediscovered the satisfaction of physical creation, complementing his digital architectural work with tangible projects. I've even begun teaching basic woodworking classes at the community center, sharing skills that many young people never had the opportunity to learn from their own fathers or grandfathers. Sarah's stepchildren join us sometimes, eager to build their own creations and soak up the multi-generational wisdom. The cradle I made for Jackson, once relegated to storage, now sits in the nursery, awaiting the arrival of his little sister. Meredith asked specifically if we could refurbish it together, a gesture of reconciliation that meant more than any words of apology. As for me, I've started seeing Catherine from my support group regularly, though we both maintain our independent lives and homes. She understands the complexity of loving again after losing a spouse of many decades. We move slowly with respect for our past loves and hope for whatever time we have left. What happened that Christmas was painful but necessary, a breaking point that forced us all to reevaluate what family truly means. Thomas had to choose between impressing his in-laws and respecting his father. By refusing to be dismissed, I gave him the opportunity to remember his values and find his way back to what matters. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do when pushed is not to push back in anger, but to stand firm in our worth. Not to shout, but to quietly take up the space we deserve. And sometimes the family we build through struggle and reconciliation is stronger than the one we had before. Have you ever had to stand your ground with family, even when it was difficult or uncomfortable? How did you balance self-respect with preserving relationships? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it is never too late to heal family wounds. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember that dignity and love can coexist even in our most challenging family moments.